Welcome back for another episode of the 5G Guys. I'm Wayne Smith, joined by my co-host Dan McVaugh.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the 5G Guys. Just a quick reminder before we get started to, if you haven't already, subscribe to our newsletter. We send out a cool summary of interesting technology stories every Friday, and of course we'll let you know if and when we have new episodes that drop. So go to 5gguys.com and you can subscribe right there. Today we are going to be talking about net neutrality. What is it? How did it come about? How will net neutrality potentially change the way us as consumers consume and access connectivity content? To dive into this topic, we wanted to find a guest who has been right in the middle of this policy issue over the years, and that's where we found our guest today, Nathan Leamer. Nathan used to work under Chairman Ajit Pai, the chairman of the FCC during the Trump administration, when net neutrality was last repealed. So today, Nathan is the CEO and founder of Fixed Gear Strategies, and he's also the executive director of the Digital First Project. So Nathan, thanks for being a guest. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks again for having me. Great to be on.
So first of all, I have to say that I think this is the shortest guest introduction I've done in terms of your bio and background. So just give our listeners a little more meat on the bone of how you got to where you're at today.
So when I worked on Capitol Hill and for the chairman, we'd always have to send these huge bios that were like pages long. And I'm so used to working with reporters and media people who are like, you know, we have a 30-second spot on the TV hit or whatever. We don't need a full bio. And so I've just like totally taken the opposite approach to all the people I used to work for and just keep it short. Make the intrigue big so that you ask probing questions like you just did to learn more about me. So I used to work on Capitol Hill where I worked for several years working on tech policy as a legislative aide. And then from there I worked in the think tank space where I worked for the organization called the R Street Institute, where I was a senior fellow working on technology policy, mostly around intellectual property, surveillance, privacy, encryption, a couple other issues that kind of touched on telecom as well. And then moved into the FCC where I got to work for Ajit Pai as a policy advisor to him. My job was actually working on all the external affairs. So me and their comms team, basically anytime he was put out in the public eye, I got to have a huge part in that conversation. And then also when we did a lot of the rollouts for our initiatives, my job was basically to work with all the external entities, whether it's communicators on Capitol Hill, whether it's people in the press, whether it's working with third-party organizations and alternative media. How do you get a Jeet to go on a podcast or something like that? I basically made that happen. And then from there, I learned all these kind of great skills of kind of working about the policy making and the communication side. And so I figured, let's combine these. And so I worked at a company called Targeted Victory for several years, where I was a vice president and worked on several consulting clients. And then last year I said, why not start my own shop? So literally June 1st is my 1-year anniversary as my own company. It's been a really exciting ride and allows me to kind of do a lot of the work that I want to do, but also have fun with my family, get on my bike as much as I can. And more importantly today, I'm working on my barbecue. I started smoking a pork shoulder about 6 a.m. and it's going to be great for this evening.
Well, that's awesome. I'm a big barbecue smoker guy myself, so I have some big plans for this Memorial Day weekend. So, but anyways, so tell us about net neutrality for those listeners that maybe they may have heard about it, but they don't really understand what it is. Let's just define it for them and what it is.
Yeah, so net neutrality is first and foremost a concept that was created in 2003 by a Columbia University professor named Tim Wu. Tim Wu has gone on to become really active in the political space. He's a really, really smart man and someone who a lot of more liberal-leaning Democratic politicians look to on tech policy debates. And he coined this phrase net neutrality out of a fear that internet providers, the giants of tech back in the early 2000s, would basically use their market power and just the way the internet was structured to basically create anti-competitive practices, whether slow lanes for competitors. If you're an AT&T user and you're using a Verizon funded device or product, maybe, or trying to access Verizon's website or Yahoo or some affiliated entity, you might get slowed down traffic. Whether it was like blocking access to Google because the internet providers thought of them as a potential competitor. These are concepts that were hypothetical fears. And his idea was that there were no rules of the road of the internet. And, if there's no rules, would the largest providers create these kind of anti-competitive practices to slow down to slow down competition, to hinder free speech? These are fears that I think are understandable when you think about how powerful certain companies can be in the internet ecosystem. However, in 2003, 2008, 2018, 2024, there's actually never really been an example of these type of blocking and throttling. And so, it's like a hypothetical fear, but it is bought into the zeitgeist of a lot of kind of early internet users and activists in the early 2000s. And actually, former President Barack Obama actually made it a campaign pledge that we're going to have what's net neutrality of the internet. And as you can imagine, rallies the base because a lot of people who use the internet are obviously concerned about gatekeepers throttling their access. However, when you make the FCC the arbiter of this, they really have very few tools at their disposal to enact these kind of principles. So after a long fight over the several years, there was a 2000, I'm going to double check the year on this one, a 2008 like principles statement, and then there was in 2010 an open internet order in which Chairman Janikowski defined the following principles: net neutrality, transparency, no blocking, no unreasonable discrimination, an open internet, and vigilance for a successful open internet. This went back and forth in the courts, and eventually, I told you this was going to be a long story. In 2015, under the second FCC chairman under the Obama administration, Tom Wheeler, they established the Open Internet Order, which established net neutrality under Title II rules, which basically said any internet provider is treated as a public utility. And so they can't block, they can't throttle. However, it also opens up kind of transformation from being seen as a information service to a telecom service, and that basically meant that they're the same as a phone company. The problem is internet is very different than phones, and the type of data you're using and the type of innovations that's being used. And so that was established in 2015, and then we've had a big fight ever since to kind of go back and forth on it.
Yeah, wow. That's a mouthful for sure. And it's really hard to, I think, for a consumer to understand, what's at battle here. Is it really them versus us, or and I think on top of it, technology's improved so much that we don't see anything in, whether you're streaming on Netflix or watching something on ESPN or anything. I mean, it's pretty instantaneous. So from a consumer point of view, why is it important to them?
Yeah, what a great point and great question. That's the other part of this, is that the conversation around net neutrality really fit into the kind of transition of the internet from like more dial-up and kind of older technologies to now we have ubiquitous high-speed internet mostly around the country. And yes, there's underserved parts of the country or unserved communities. None of them will hear this podcast because they can't access the internet. It was a really bad joke. But the fact is that there are parts of the country that are unserved, and I think that's a really fair point. However, we are seeing new technologies come to fruition, whether it's wireless, fixed wireless, fiber, even low Earth orbit satellites, whether it's SpaceX, Starlinks, or Project Kuiper from Amazon. We see all these different technologies coming together, and so the fears that there would be one or two providers from 10, 15 years ago have really been proven untrue because of innovation and economic opportunity and just the transformation of networks, and that's actually what Chairman Ajit Pai really recognized in early 2017 when he introduced what's called the Restoring Internet Freedom Order, which repealed the Title II framework of net neutrality. It added a transparency requirement that actually required, if there was going to be some sort of a change in the internet traffic or some sort of content moderation standards or practices that would affect the way people, consumers receive their content, they would be forced to report that, and that allowed consumers more knowledge about what's going on. But again, we never saw any of the problems that people predicted. In fact, internet speeds dramatically went up after 2017. And if you remember during the pandemic in Europe, which has a Title II styled framework, their own version of utility style rules, because of course it's Europe and they have utility style rules on the internet, they actually had to throttle YouTube and other streaming services. If you remember in March and April and May of 2020, they were so concerned that they wouldn't be able to handle the increased traffic that they actually had to throttle down the quality of the videos and streaming out of concern that moms and grandmas couldn't access the internet to get their email or check the doctor's websites and that sort of thing. The US did not have that at all. We had a total proliferation of internet usage. Anyone who lived through the pandemic remembers that. And we didn't have these kind of concerns about competition or throttling or access at the internet provider level. Now, you and I could talk a lot about censorship at Google level or at Amazon or Apple or any of these other entities, but the bigger concerns mostly were for example, Google censoring on YouTube or Spotify censoring certain, stuff and Meta and that sort of thing, and Twitter. But that's a different conversation about censorship, not necessarily about competition.
Right. Well, and I think the thing is, to your point is, there's already vehicles, are there not, within our legal framework by which anti-competitive practices can be handled without a special order or a special treatment, right? So if we talk about Apple, for example, right, there's litigation going on or has been going on with their anti-competitive accusations in their app store, right?
Yeah.
So there's the Federal Trade Commission, and there's avenues that can be handled, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look at us right now with DOJ opening an investigation into Ticketmaster, right? I mean, these are the type of things people are looking at all the time. But in the U.S., where we have literally thousands of internet providers, classified internet providers, from small entities to the largest that you can think of, that you see their TV commercials in every football game every week. We have so many options and new ones proliferating that it's a different environment. Now, again, everyone who has to call their internet provider complaining about their router being out understands how frustrating that customer service is. But in terms of actual prices and conversations around access and opportunity, we are seeing a proliferation of new competitive services, and that's something to be applauded and encouraged. And again, that's what's been so fascinating is we've seen new providers come to market, new ideas, new opportunities. We're able to enable the proliferation of AI and crypto and Web3 services because of a robust marketplace. So when you treat it as if there's just one telephone company, that's just not the same.
Right.
Unfortunately, though, net neutrality is still a very politically, or seen as a very politically important concept by certain, mostly activists. I don't have to be partisan, but people who really love that concept and love the issue because it helps their framework of how they think the internet should be viewed long term. And so that's why it got brought back this year. And that's, but it's funny, they're not using the same narrative. It's not about free speech, because free speech doesn't matter anymore, apparently, after Google censoring access or Twitter's posts, censoring people's access. But it's not about competition. They're not talking about competition because, again, you have the Affordable Connectivity Program, you have the BEAD program, you have all these other programs to generate, more adoption and deployment of internet services. But it's about national security. So somehow the FCC couldn't possibly protect our networks from Huawei, ZTE, China Telecom, all entities that we sanctioned while I was at the FCC, by the way. But now we have to use this to protect national security somehow, which doesn't make sense how this is needed to do certain things. But that's been the argument for bringing it back.
Yeah, so you bring up a great point. So it went away, and now it's back. And I didn't realize. So you're saying they rewrote it to deal with national security versus 10 years ago, it was about making sure that we weren't throttling or discriminating against internet users.
Yeah, I mean that's been the main justification for the reason for it. But the weird thing about that is we already had the ability to communicate within the different agencies in the federal government for rising concerns about cybersecurity, whether it's at the platform level, and I'll talk about it later, but like, TikTok was banned, and Brendan Carr, a commissioner, was very much involved in that conversation. I shouldn't say banned, sorry, forced divestiture. I know that's a technical term, but like, we're kicking TikTok off our network in the U.S. if they're not going to divest from the Chinese overlords. Like that's already happening. Huawei has already been banned out of our networks. We got the rip and replace program to get this faulty material, this unsecure networks out of our infrastructure. So like we already have the ability to do so. But also the FCC, even if it was treated as a public utility, wouldn't be able to just do it on their own. They're going to be in coordination with the NTIA and CFIUS and DOJ and State Department and the White House. All those play, and Congress. By the way, Congress plays a part in all this too. So like it to me, the argument really never really hit home for this new reasoning to bring it back.
I'm curious, being more of the technical minded person, being an engineer in this industry for so many years. Are there aspects of I'm thinking about situations and circumstances as an engineer and a carrier operator where I manage my networks in a way that could net neutrality hamper my ability to do things in a way that are actually efficient. So, for example, if I use some specific examples, T-Mobile for a long time, I don't know if they still do, they offered their customers a deal with a partnership with Netflix where you got free Netflix as a T-Mobile subscriber. But what they did was they throttled your Netflix streaming to your phone to 720, because guess what? The size of the screen of your phone can't handle anything bigger than that anyways. So it makes perfect sense to throttle it to 720 because 1080 isn't going to show up on your phone anyways. And then that way they can manage the traffic on their network better to ensure better service to their customers as a whole. So would something like that be restricted with net neutrality for a carrier?
I think the best way of describing it is like the bigger problem actually was in states like California that actually passed their own net neutrality provisions in their framework. They actually did, banning a practice such as zero rating or free data services. And so it kind of creates this weird framework where some of the states, because they really want this utility style approach, enabled that. I think there's some people at the FCC who voted for the new net neutrality order who would claim, well, we might not go after that, but it's still out there. It's still I think an interesting way. It's a dark cloud that hangs over operators. The other thing I'm actually more curious about is long-term implications on AI. If you're using AI in some way for network management purposes, especially as we have this proliferation of this new innovation, what if they are doing content moderation in a way that the FCC deems as that goes against our rules, and what's that mean for those providers and those users who are benefiting from that approach? You're adding this sort of like uncertainty that now these providers, small and large, have to abide by. It also can, hinder their ability to develop new concepts because it might not fit within the standards that the FCC has established. In fact, actually, we see this right now on AI because the FCC literally just opened a new. This is totally outside topic, but I'll flag it anyway. They just started a proceeding to require disclosures about AI in any campaign material or any candidates, whether it's posted, it's broadcast over the airwaves. So, like, if hypothetically a campaign staffer used ChatGPT prompts to like develop some draft, language that then months later became part of a campaign commercial or slogan or something like that, and they don't disclose it, now they face penalties and investigations from the FCC. Can you imagine how we use that? Not just against, hindering innovation, but also like against your political enemies. Someone who's running against, the current president or the future president, in their party, they could use that to investigate people who are on the wrong side of the political aisle.
Wow. Hey, it sure sounds like this is the fight for growing the government. That the FCC needed more things and more regulatory to get in the way of an already crowded regulatory environment when it comes to wireless and telecommunications, because it's just one more step. And the FCC has really weighed into two parts, right? To what you said. The first is their ruling on DEI. That now you have net neutrality on top of it to make sure they just squeeze the box on it. And instead of trying to really innovate our country and bring things, it's growing the government side, so they have to find a way to manage these policies.
What a great point. I'm glad you brought it up, because I was also going to bring it up that a couple months before the FCC passed this new Title II framework, bringing it back, they also passed the Digital Discrimination Order, which, as you said, is DEI of the internet, and basically establishing a disparate impact standard on anyone in providing internet services. The thing that frustrates me, and actually Dan, one of the people that introduced us, is Todd Schreckele of NATE. They represent tower climbers and infrastructure builders and the contractors. Well, the Digital Discrimination Order, this DEI of the internet, actually targets them. They're a covered entity. So if you're one of the tower climbers, or one of the people building out infrastructure, laying out the fiber, you could be held liable for perpetuating a digital discrimination, even though you didn't get to pick where it was built. You didn't get to say, oh, we site the tower here. Guess who gave you that authority? The government, the literal local state government, who told you you can build here on this side of the road, not there. So they're being held liable for disparate impact, even though they aren't the ones who perpetuated this, because it was a plan made because of the providers and because of the local governments. But by the way, local governments are not covered by the Digital Discrimination Order, because they can't go after the mini broadband entities or the municipal parties. But you're totally right; it fits into this larger kind of approach to governance that is really going to hinder innovation and really make it harder to close the digital divide and better connect consumers across the country.
So technically, as we stand today, as we're recording this podcast, net neutrality, or being or the mechanism to bring it back into play, has not been passed, right? It's in discussions. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we're potentially, it's going to be reenacted. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think it will be reenacted here still this year? Do you think there's a chance that it isn't? Any predictions on that front?
So yeah, I mean, the FCC passed, a vote by 3-2 a couple weeks ago. Actually, it was April 23rd, 24th. And so it actually just got posted in the Federal Registry. So it always takes a few weeks for once the FCC passes it, so it's posted in the Congressional, Federal Registry. And so now it's going to be a two-part process. One is there's going to be an appeal. And I believe that's already been, in the works. And it'll be fought in court. Also, Congress is making their voice heard as well. Representative Bob Latta has introduced a Congressional Review Act to repeal the order by the FCC. Politically speaking, I doubt that it has the votes. I don't think a Democratic Senate would allow that to go through. But it does speak to the fact that there's going to be both a legislative and judicial review of this item. Interestingly, this item also is in a precarious situation politically, because it took them so many years to push through. If you remember, Ajit Pai pushed this through, introduced his initiative in 2017, months after he was named chairman of the FCC. Jessica Rosenworcel, the current FCC chair under the Biden administration, she didn't start this process till about 6-7 months ago. If you remember, we have an election to re-elect the president in 2020, in months ahead of time. So what's interesting now is we had a longer term track record to show what was happening, how it benefited the consumers, and no one died because of net neutrality. So I think we're okay. If you remember all those crazy predictions that the internet would end and people would die and you wouldn't be able to access all the cat videos in the world and yada yada, all that proved untrue. Now we have a different situation where it's taken them so long to get this through, years. that I think actually it kind of shows that, maybe it's not as politically viable. The fact they had to change their arguments is going to be something that the courts look into. And, there's far smarter lawyers than me, because I'm not a lawyer. I play one on TV, but I'm not a real one, who can kind of walk you through the legal battle that's going to happen over the next several years. But you're right, it does fit into this kind of larger conversation about the rules of the road for the internet, both at the network level, but also at the apps level and the platform level.
Well, this has been very educational for me, and hopefully for our audience as well. Tell us more about what you're doing today with your company, and also the Digital First Project. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So the company, I do consulting for tech and telecom and infrastructure entities who are kind of engaging in DC. I'm not a lobbyist. My theory is that the people I work with are their best lobbyists and their best advocates. But if I can be a Sherpa to help people kind of navigate this big town in DC, I'm happy to do so. And so a lot of my work revolves around kind of figuring out how to kind of cut through the noise. How do you get in the ears of members? How do you get in the ears of policymakers and the people who are in this ecosystem to make your voice heard and get your message across? And I'm always kind of looking for kind of guerrilla tactics. A lot of people spend a lot of money to do things like sponsored ads and just kind of stuff that I roll out all the time, that kind of like, whatever, I've seen this advertisement before, move on. And I'm really interested in kind of ways that you can kind of transform conversations almost organically, and in a way of leveraging people who are already working on these issues. So, for example, Fixed Gear Strategies did a lot of work on the TikTok issue. And I mentioned this before, but TikTok was something that me and several other people really had concerns with, and we were able to kind of pool our resources and our expertise together. And we created a Robin Hood and Merry Men signal thread. So I basically created a signal thread where I found anyone that cared about the issue from the left and the right, and we just communicated, and we rapid response. And honestly, we were able to work hand in hand with members on Capitol Hill and others to push through and the divestiture, which we thought was really important. And it's like those type of projects are really fun for me, and working on my own allows me to do more of that. When I worked at a larger firm, oh man, it was all about scaling up and upselling and yada yada yada. I'm like, this is fine. I have enough for my barbecue. I have enough for my new bike, which is back there. I got enough for my kids. I don't need to upsell. I just want to have fun. And this has allowed me to do that and do this work. But then Digital First Project is a nonprofit that I started that really works on efforts to kind of close the digital divide, advocating for kind of market-friendly policies that allow us to kind of improve our network capacity, people's access to the internet, but also looking at cybersecurity issues, national security issues in tech space, and right-sizing kind of the policy framework going forward.
Yeah, super fascinating. When you talk about the digital divide, and I know this is a little off subject, but it's not only just having internet access, it's being able to afford a computer also, right? Yeah. And being able to have the things in place to do it. So that's really, I think that hits home for a lot of folks out there.
Yeah, what's true about that is there are some really, I think, thoughtful, pragmatic, market-based solutions. And for example, I think I'll just put my cards on the table. I think there's dozens of broadband programs in the country. In fact, there's actually 114 broadband programs. Many of them are on the deployment side, subsidies and different auctions and whatnot. But there are several programs for adoption on the adoption side. ACP is one of them. USF is another. And what's interesting is looking at the comparing and contrasting the way Lifeline or USF works versus ACP. And I'll say this, I think ACP is an example of a voucher-based, means testing is actually, I think, better and that's tech neutral versus some of the other programs that exist. And so if the idea is, hey, there's these unserved and underserved communities who have an affordability issue, why don't we leverage the tools in the toolbox to actually get them connectivity instead of some of these arbitrary, arduous, wonky programs that are rife with fraud and abuse? Let's right size the system to make sure that those who are on the wrong side get that access, while also not creating a new entitlement program that is not actually serving those who need it.
So for listeners, we always try to, one of our themes is we try to strip out the acronyms. So we've talked about ACP in past episodes, but Affordable Connectivity Program, right? And so that's a subsidy program, like you said, so that folks that can't afford connectivity, whether it be cell phone or what have you, have basically a voucher that gives them a discount to service, right?
Right. And what's interesting is, that voucher, I think there's 23 million Americans who are leveraging that. If you go like a dollar for dollar comparison with some of the other programs like the Universal Service Fund, USF, Lifeline, etc., maybe even E-rate for schools and whatnot. It seems like a better deal. It seems like a better deal for taxpayers, and also is an easier program for individuals to participate in. And so it's currently in debate in Capitol Hill. And here, I'm not here to like advocate on the ACP, but I'm just talking about how these are ways that members and policymakers on both sides of the aisle can kind of creatively look at the situation and be like, hey, if we have this pot of money and we believe, Republicans and Democrats, that we should be helping those on the wrong side of the digital divide get ahead, let's look creatively about options that are out there to do this. The Universal Service Fund has a real funding problem. It's not feasible long term. It's spending a lot more money than it's bringing in, and so it's currently made up of contributions from internet users like yourself who are paying the fees. Are there better ways of going about funding this program? Could you combine it with ACP? Could you fund it through, I don't know, advertising by large tech companies such as Google, who are making $1 bazillion and not participating in a program that is giving them new customers every day, instead of actually charging you or me or lower income Americans or middle class Americans. So it's things like that that's kind of like, it's fun to debate and discuss and get people thinking about. I'm not here to convince you one way or the other, but just to show like there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I think that telecom and tech, the more we think creatively and talk about interesting ideas that are out there, the better we can kind of move the ball along.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of E-rate, for example, over the years. I've seen some really cool projects where school districts that just don't have the funding to bring fiber into their school, are able to now have fiber into their school and really get connectivity. During the pandemic, there was a school district here in Colorado that not only was able to do that, but also buy Chromebooks for their students to have at home, so they were able to continue to take classes from home. That was all paid for by E-rate. So I think that's a great program. I've also been a proponent. I think like when we think about one of the other things the FCC does is they are the ones that are auctioning off spectrum to mobile service providers for billions and billions of dollars. I don't see why there's not a way we can combine some of these efforts with those programs where, hey, as a carrier, if you go out and fill some of these digital divide caps, maybe areas, maybe you get some credits that you can use in an auction, for example. I think there's a lot more we can still do by looking at all these programs, and it's something that I'm very passionate about as well. So I'm excited. I could talk to you about this for hours.
Well, I mean, to that end, you're totally right about what are the creative programs that are doing well, and how do you bolster them, but also at the same time right-size them. I'm going to tell you a funny story. My father-in-law, love my father-in-law. He's never going to listen to this show, so I can't say it. My father-in-law somehow is qualified for ACP because he's retired, and the way the income, they judge your income, he qualifies for ACP. I know how much my father-in-law is worth. I know how much his house is worth. He shouldn't be on the ACP program. I'm going to be honest. And that's the type of thing that we got to figure out. How do you solve a problem so that my father-in-law, love you, Jim, is no longer on the program, but also making sure that those who actually need it can. Or, for example, E-rate, you're making sure that schools that need connectivity are able to, but also something that I think Ted Cruz is looking at that I think Jonathan Haidt wrote about recently in his new book about kids online is why are school buses subsidized with millions of dollars to have access on school buses where there's no parental controls, there's no supervision. I homeschool my kids, so this isn't a problem. But my neighbors have a 5 and 6 year old on a school bus for 15-20 minutes. Should she really be accessing unfettered access to the internet with a bunch of 12-13 year olds showing them what they see on TikTok or whatever? I don't know that should be happening or subsidized by the government? Those are the type of right-sizing questions that you're totally right on. And you mentioned spectrum authorization. I don't know, maybe the FCC should have its spectrum authority reauthorized. Like, that's another question that we have about this stuff going forward. So, I mean, there's all these questions that are happening, and what I've enjoyed about my career path is I'm able to kind of get into the weeds on these things. And, I see myself as a campaign manager for policy ideas. I'm not a campaign manager to get politicians elected, but I'm trying to think through how can we solve these long-term problems, and who can I work with in the media, third-party groups, different advocacy organizations, and different consumer groups and others to tell this story about why we need to get X, Y, and Z passed, or keep A, B, and C from happening. And it's been a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. And to your point, we talked about this earlier. Telecom is really like the granddaddy of all tech policy. All the AI conversations, all the tech conversations, they're all kind of stemming back from the concepts around net neutrality. Do you have a mother may I approach, or do you have a approach that allows permissionless innovation? What are the different frameworks? AI is this right now. These AI safety kind of philosophy versus kind of an AI accelerationist view. So it's almost like a religious war between these people. And it's like, how do you think about the future of AI? Well, you can literally go back to 1996 and the work you've been doing, Dan and Wayne, and realize these are the same discussions that we've been having for 30 years. And that's why these podcasts are really important, to show how you guys are a huge part of that conversation. Have a lot to share in that conversation. I can totally filibuster like Ted Cruz. My apologies.
No. I think an interesting piece I read the other day, that if you look over the last, since 1996, the wireless industry has been the catalyst for the economy in the whole U.S. to grow, from the first iPhone to where we're at today. And now you look at at politicians, and maybe I am biased. Now we're putting in more regulatory to crush the innovation that's grown the economy to these high levels, the highest ever last week, on the stock market. Right now we're going to put more rules in to stop it. It's almost counterintuitive. Maybe they need to look at history and what we've done before going out, passing a new set of rules and regulations that really don't serve, to your point. What's the outcome?
Well, this is what frustrates me about the AI one. This is an easy one. The FCC has rules in the books to go after fake deepfakes. If you do a fake call, which someone did actually several months ago in New Hampshire, they did a robocall pretending to be Joe Biden. They used a deepfake AI technology to do that. But guess what they did? The FCC went after them because they have rules in the books to go after that person. If Scarlett Johansson accused OpenAI of using her likeness for her voice, there's already rules on the road. I was listening to a podcast. Crispin Glover sued the makers of Back to the Future 2 because they used a stuntman to look like him in his likeness back in 1989. We've already had the rules of the road to adjudicate this. Everyone who saw Star Wars remakes, the reboot, has seen them go back and remake Princess Leia, or go back and make these characters. We have rules of the road for Photoshop and for changing likeness and whatnot. So I don't understand how we can't apply those already established rules to go after bad actors. But you don't need to establish a new framework that could really hinder the ability of others to participate in the ecosystem of ideas in the economy.
This has been fascinating. We can't thank you enough for being on the show. Learned a lot today. Best of luck to you and your smoking over the weekend. Hope your shoulder turns out great.
Well, the timing of this worked out really well. So I got to go upstairs outside and check it out. I think I'm getting close to the time where you get the first temperature check. You know what I mean? When you're 3 hours in, that first temperature check's always fun. You got the little bark is starting to get there. It's always fun. So I'm a wood man. I'm a wooden coal man. I'm not using that rabbit food, Traeger stuff. No offense if you are. I appreciate you guys, but I'm a wood man. My father taught me well. I learned from the best. So, I'm not from Texas, but I really do appreciate what they do. So I got to do it right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the 5G Guys. For more resources and to connect with Dan and Wayne, check out their website at 5gguys.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that follow button and share this episode with your friends and family.